I'm a licensed psychotherapist for the past 25 years, and I am an expert relationships and boundaries and communication. I would say those are probably the top three. And I got into like my obsession with healthy boundaries. I mean, what do they say? You teach what you most need to learn. The way that I was feeling taken advantage of or put out by others or used really in my relationships had to do with my lack of internal boundaries and my lack of sort of setting limits with folks. I was overgiving and then being resentful and being like, you're entitled, which are they? I don't know. Or was I just serving myself up on a silver platter and they really thought I was doing what I wanted to do? So that whole entire experience in therapy changed my life. I'm not satisfied. Like, I'm not happy. This literally making supermodels richer cannot be my dharma in life. There's got to be something more substantial or important to me. And my own therapeutic process was like, I just couldn't believe that how therapy could change the trajectory of a life.
So, Terry, welcome to the Warrior Academy podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super psyched to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you here. I've seen your work online. Really, really fascinating stuff. I'm going to selfishly use the next hour just to sit here and learn as much as I can. It's been a very interesting couple of minutes just chatting to you about the work you're currently doing. For anyone who doesn't know who you are, just give me a very quick insight, a little background into who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm a licensed psychotherapist for the past 25 years, and I am an expert on relationships and boundaries and communication. I would say those are probably the top three. And I got into like my obsession with healthy boundaries. I mean, what do they say? You teach what you most need to learn. And so I was definitely a boundary disaster for sure in my 20s. And that really negatively impacted my relationships, but I wasn't clear about how it was impacting. I really believed that if my boyfriend would just be different, or if my boss just wasn't a jerk, it would all be great. Not realizing that the way that I was feeling taken advantage of or put out by others or used really in my relationships had to do with my lack of internal boundaries and my lack of sort of setting limits with folks. I was overgiving and then being resentful and being like, you're entitled, which are they? I don't know. Or was I just serving myself up on a silver platter and they really thought I was doing what I wanted to do? So that whole entire experience in therapy changed my life. So before I became a psychotherapist, I actually was a talent agent negotiating contracts for supermodels and celebrities before I changed careers. And in changing careers in my early 30s, people were like, what? Wait a minute, you're going to social work? Like, well, what are you doing and why? You're making all this money, you're representing Naomi Campbell, like, why would you do this? And I got to a pivot point in my own life through my own therapeutic process, meaning me being in therapy, where I was like, I'm not satisfied. Like, I'm not happy. This literally making supermodels richer cannot be my dharma in life. There's got to be something more substantial or important to me. And my own therapeutic process was like, I just couldn't believe that how therapy could change the trajectory of a life. And that in deciding to really look in and go, oh, hi, the call is coming from within the house. Like, literally, it's I'm the problem, it's me, not to quote Taylor, but that's a fact, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe how empowering that was, because when you're flipping it, and I know a lot of your work has a lot to do with victim mentality and not being a victim, but it's very easy when you're unclear about what's going on to be looking out and blaming and being like, it's you, Sebastian, you're the problem, it's not me. Yeah. And yet the most empowered way of approaching it is me, because if it's me, I can change it. So that was the longest way around the barn, but yeah.
There's so much to pick apart there. There's so much gold in that. I think it's really interesting. First of all, the last thing you said, you know, where we seek for answers from outside of ourselves when actually that we've got them inside all along, right? Isn't that fascinating that we're constantly looking for on the exterior for some sort of reason as to why things are, why are things a certain way. I mean, and that blame we often put on other people for our own circumstances. And for me, one of the things that, we had a chat just before this, and I said, I'm fascinated by the word tolerances, which is very, very similar to boundaries in a lot of ways, right? And I'm sure you'll be able to distinguish the difference between the two. But for me, I often see what we get in life is we basically get what we tolerate. And that can be an unhealthy relationship. It can be an unhealthy relationship with partners, or with food, or with habits, or with addictions, whatever it is. Ultimately, you set the boundary, and then you get what you tolerate. How much of that is related to kind of your work and what you do?
A lot, because actually I think it's very true. So why don't we start with, I'll establish my definition of boundaries. Your boundaries, I want you to think about them as your own personal rules of engagement. This is how we let other people know what's okay with us and what's not okay with us. Our boundaries are made up of our preferences, our desires, our limits, and our deal breakers. So the problem with that is that most people don't know what they are. And it's not enough to know what they are, your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers. You also have to then have the capability of clearly communicating them. And that therein lies the rub, because most people really don't have the words. And there's so many reasons. So before we get to the tolerances, let's actually sort of unpack a little bit. Why don't we know how to set healthy boundaries? Why don't we know? And women in particular, I find this to be true because nobody taught us. And that's literally, it is simple as that, as simple and as complicated. Because when you think about the way we're raised, men and women raised to be good boys, good girls, like, don't be a troublemaker. Don't be a big mouth. Turn that frown around, right? If you don't have anything nice to say.
I've got a bit of a theory on this, which is
tell.
which I feel like we've become a kind of generational people pleasers. And I feel like we've almost got this, like I wrote about it on social media today, this like pandemic of social rejection, right? Which I think stems from social media. And I think that a lot of people are, if you look at how society is these days, the majority of people are terrified to speak their mind and to upset people. So they're in this perpetual state of people pleasing. That's the majority. And then you've got the minority who actually profit massively from upsetting people and get huge audiences from it, and use that attention and monetize it and so on, right? And so what's interesting for me is how, we're very afraid to speak our minds and actually share with other people what it is we're upset about or happy about, or what we want to do, what we don't want to do. And so you kind of tiptoe around and people please. And I guess what you mentioned was that it's harder for women. I can understand that, but one of the things I see with men is, I think setting your tolerance as a man is really important, and I think that normally comes naturally to men, right? Men typically are afraid to say, this is what I stand for, this is who I am, and have the kind of leadership aspect there to do it. I think that's a very masculine energy, but I think a lot of men don't have that nowadays, and I think that it then means they get on a very different path, and I think it's very linked to how social media's evolved. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think that, men and women are being canceled equally, right? So this is a whole new arena of socialization, right? It's not that it's new, obviously, it's been around, but in the length of time that the world has been around, it actually is still very new. And the rules of engagement on social media are very different. And really, it's just like the internet was, right, before we started having some rules and regulations around it. It's like the Wild West. And I feel that way about social media. And back in the day, it used to be, because one of my specialties in my therapy practice is highly visible people, and which made sense. I went from being a talent agent with highly visible people to being a therapist with highly visible people, because there are particular problems that come along with living in this kind of a fishbowl and having eyes on you all the time, where back in the day when I started being a therapist, it was way less regular people having issues with this visibility and it was almost only famous people. And now I see regular people who have this same hyper self-consciousness that comes from always feeling like people are watching your every move. And so there's two things sort of about this. One, to speak to what you're saying, it is heavily influencing people's ability to be honest if what they value is this acceptance online. Like, listen, we all need belonging, right? This is a part of the human condition. So we all want to belong, but there's some people who are more pandering than others. There are some people who are, look at the politicians in the US, like you can't get a straight answer from anybody. It's just such a mess. I mean, whatever, we don't have to get into that, but where it's so hard for someone to tell their truth in these positions of power if people don't agree with it. And then you have people who don't, like you said, you have either trolls or you have people who are profiting, right? The whole fake news stuff and whatever, people who are profiting on just being contrary, just this is what I'm doing. This is sort of my trip. It's like how, some kids, it's like negative attention is the attention they get. They're like, who cares? When it's dollars and cents, when you're talking about advertising dollars, they don't care if it's positive or negative. They're still making money. It's all about the eyes. But how does that impact us as a society, as a community? And how does it influence us as individuals, where dialing into, like you said, especially before Me Too and all of the last, 8 years, let's say, Hollywood leading the way, just great, of the need for this Me Too movement, there certainly have been men caught up in this who don't deserve to be. And then there are certainly men not caught up in this who definitely deserve to be. But it's like the fear of even talking to women. Do you know a guy named Professor Galloway? Anyway,
I've heard the name, yeah.
Yeah, he's super smart. He talks a lot. He does a lot of data-driven studies with young men societally, and what is sort of going on and how it's to the point with young men, how many of them are not engaging, not having intimacy, not even trying to date, because there's so much paranoia about.
I recently interviewed a gentleman called Adil Hussein on the War Academy podcast, who the founder of DXB Brotherhood. Essentially, he's trying to help men be men, and he feels that Dubai is kind of a city of lost boys. And one of the things he talks about is exactly this. Women aren't used to being approached anymore by men because the men are too terrified to approach women through the basic fear of rejection anyway. But on top of that, the fear of everything else around that, and what are they going to think if I approach them and all this sort of stuff. When really, for a lot of women who want to be approached, they're now not getting approached, and they're looking for a man who might approach them, right?
Yep, it's so true. And also another thing that Professor Galloway talks about is how dating online, how much this is impacted, because you have like 20% of the men getting 80% of the women's attention. And then that lower, right, that the 80% that are not those guys who are good looking, maybe have money, whatever the thing is that people are looking for, they get like virtually no play at all. So you're talking about 80% of the guys online. And then I feel like there's some connection to this incel stuff, these groups of men being so angry and so hateful towards women and feeling so left out in the cold. And I don't even know how they feel. I mean, I can't imagine getting into that kind of a mind, but we're talking about extremes of sort of what can happen. And it does come back to, what are you tolerating? Right. So if you're tolerating not speaking up, not telling your truth as a man, let's just say, of how you feel and what you want out of fear, you're not fully embodying yourself. Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with women. If you are not speaking up, and really, what is it to have healthy boundaries? It's really telling the truth about how you feel, about what you want, about your preferences.
I feel like it's a very attractive quality in someone when they've got healthy boundaries and when they're happy to speak up and speak their truth. I also totally get what you're saying. I feel like within gender these days, there's a very kind of adversarial approach, us versus them. And, you've got they've got the far extremes of each, right? You've got the kind of, misandry side of the extreme feminism, which is almost anti-men in a lot of ways. And then on the other side of that, you've got the kind of red pill Andrew Tate crowd who are just, anti-women. And so you've got this with everything in life, there's always this balance in the universe, right? It's like, here are these two completely opposite groups that weren't really there before. And now we're seeing them kind of fight it out on social media. And because, so often to get traction on social media, for things to go viral, they almost they have to be very, very short and sharp. And you've almost got this crude reductionist approach to content, which gets the most attention. And so we're led to believe that these two kind of points of view are what 80% of people actually believe. But it's interesting. Have you seen that adversarial approach in some of the content you've seen online?
Oh, yes, most definitely. And it's funny. I wrote a thing about the Barbie movie, about my thoughts about the Barbie movie, because everyone was like,
what
"Oh
are
my
your
God."
thoughts?
I mean, pretty neutral. I was like,
I haven't actually seen it, but
well,
I've heard arguments on both sides. I haven't actually seen it myself.
I mean, for me, there was nothing like super revelatory about it for me. And maybe because I'm not a 22-year-old, I mean, could be. I've lived a life, where you're like, yeah, the patriarchy. We know. Okay. So that's a reality. Like, I understand what she was trying to do. What I didn't like about it is in the end, right? And this is spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but by now, if you haven't seen it, you're not an early adapter and it's fine. You're going to watch it on your TV anyway.
We'll pause this for anyone who hasn't seen.
We'll pause it, exactly. But in the end, there's this sort of this realization that, so the Barbies leave the Barbie land and they, realize how much the real world is awful and what the patriarchy is, because in Barbie land, the women dominate, right? So in the real world, they're like, what? So then Ken is like, holy moly, this is amazing. Like, wow, I love the real world. They come back to Barbie land, and what I would hope would happen is they would be like, wow, we're treating the Kens really badly. So instead, they go, yeah, we realize that, but the Kens are going to have to like earn their way, basically doing exactly what the actual patriarchy has done to women, like just the slow grind of trying to get equality, like one, oh my God, like one little teeny movement at a time, rather than having the realization of like, wow, this isn't cool that we are oppressing these people. Why don't we, what would it look like if it was more equitable, right? Supposedly women are if women ran the world, we wouldn't have all these wars, we wouldn't have all these problems, right? We hear this. And I was like, shouldn't that be reflected at the end of the movie? And yet it really isn't. It's basically just the exact opposite of what real life is, which is it would be a matriarchy instead of a patriarchy, still sort of oppressing the sort of marginalized group. And I really was hoping for more than that. It's the same way that I feel about, my nieces, these t-shirts that are like, the future is female. I'm like, I have 3 sons. I have an amazing husband. Why do I want a future without those people? Yeah. Like, why can't the future be female and evolved men? Yeah. And like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to leave men out of the equation. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on it.
Well, I think that's really fascinating and actually quite refreshing to hear. I look at the strong reaction to something like the Barbie movie, right? And it's, for me, it's like it all goes down to this kind of adversarial approach between the two camps, right? Anti-men, anti-women. And like with anything, when there's a particularly strong reaction, for me, it's typically because there's already a bruise there, and it's just kind of poke the bruise that's already there. It's not like it's new information. Yep. It's just a bruise that's now being poked, and this poked that bruise. So yes, it's like, why is it there in the first place? So why are we in this position? If men truly embody their masculinity and women embody their femininity, wouldn't we be in a much better position as a society?
It's funny. I don't know. Like I got to tell you, like I have friends in this wellness space that I'm in who are like expert at this. I really don't know. My thought is I'm much more of a humanist to a degree. And part of the reason the Barbie movie hit the way that it did is because the truth is we are living in a patriarchy. And even though it's better than it was in 1972, and you needed your husband to get you a credit card, like literally, you're not talking about that long ago,
Yeah.
that women were basically possessions, less than 100 years ago, like
Yeah.
literally. So there's a good reason. That bruise is there for a good reason. My thought is more working together and more dialogue and more sort of honest conversation can help, I think, rather than it's like it's not just male and female sort of baiting or hating, right? We have that there, but the reality is, what does it look like? I think men and women both, we all have the feminine and the masculine. And my theory, which is not at all scientific, it's just my observation of living my life, is that you find someone, if you're a woman, whatever level of female and masculine energy you have, you generally find someone that can match it similarly. So personally, I married a widower with 3 sons, the 3 sons I was talking about. I met a guy who's like, could get a stain out of, he's like putting a snack in my bag, getting a stain out of your shirt, because his wife died when he had a 5, a 3, and a 9-month-old. So there was this very developed sense of caregiving, which I desperately needed because I was the over caregiver. I was like, I would need to meet someone who could out caregive me to actually allow them to do anything for me.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like but he also can build anything, do anything, is very successful in his career, he actually gets embedded in war zones. He's a visual journalist.
Right.
So for me, he had all the things but it was like we balanced each other out, where I had other boyfriends, I think, who thought that I had too much masculine energy for them. They were wanting me to be smaller or to be less. And I was like, I literally don't even know how. So, I mean, of course, those relationships ended, but that's my non-scientific theory.
I think sometimes non-scientific theories are the best, right? It's interesting. I had a podcast interview this week with a guy called Ferdinand, and he runs a sort of spiritual guidance here in Dubai. Really great podcast. And he said that sometimes we look for science to give us the answers, right? When actually spirituality can give us a much wider vocabulary to actually explain something. And I think energy is a part of that as well. Energy kind of links very closely to that. And I totally agree. I think that we're very much governed by our energy as human beings in terms of the whole masculine and feminine. We try and put a label on it, male or female, but then you see same-sex relationships where there's clearly one more masculine and or more feminine and so on. And it's very much this yin and yang, which goes together. But then when I look at the kind of current situation where, with gender, and I look at that adversarial approach that I'm spotting, it almost feels like, there's this kind of, for a lot of men, I can see why they'd feel bitter, because, it's almost like the anti-male movement, which I'm seeing as well, kind of goes beyond seeking equality and kind of almost looks to punish modern men, for the small percentage of privilege their forefathers might have experienced, right?
Right, but let's not minimize it, because it's not a small percent of privilege. We're literally talking in this country, US, in 1972, you could not get a credit card without your husband. Like, you couldn't wear. Mary Tyler Moore was the first woman to wear pants on television, and this is the late 60s.
What I'm saying is the generation of young men growing up now, they won't necessarily have experienced anything like that, right?
Yes, correct.
But they're still feeling the repercussions of being punished for it, is what I mean, right?
Yeah. Yes, I think that there's truth, though. It's like, how do we move out of, right, when you've had zillions of years, like a lot of years of patriarchy? How do we move out of it, and how do we not take it out on, right? You want to be like, hi, it wasn't me, because people weren't even born in 1970. You know what I mean? Where there's something about feeling like you're paying for the sins of the past. But I think, again, it's talking, it's being in relationship and being able to have conversations about preferences, mutual respect, all of those things. If we bring it more granular, let's talk about relationships and boundaries and communication, and how this skill, being able to communicate your preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers, this is everything you want in life is on the other side of this, right? Every personal relationship, every professional relationship, right? You couldn't be doing what you're doing, Sebastian, you personally, if you didn't know what you wanted, if you didn't have the ability to pivot when needed, if you weren't, maybe you're afraid, but you do it anyway. But even during the pandemic, like shifting gears and figuring out, how do I help other entrepreneurs shift gears? Because now people with brick and mortar, nobody's leaving their house. What do we do? That's your internal boundaries. Your ability to do that is your knowing of yourself, where you go, this is important to me, this matters to me. Or the whole campaign you've got about not being a victim, all of those things, you've done them. And I wonder if, not to flip it on you, but I'm going to, I wonder if,
like a classic psychologist, this is.
Yeah, indeed.
Should I lie down on the sofa for the rest of this?
You can. People do. But I wonder if your experience with the accident that you had and what you went through, and having people tell you, like, this is not happening. You're done. You're not doing any more of these things that you want to do. And you rehabilitating for 2 years and deciding that you're going to not only walk, run, you're going to compete, you're going to win, is it Muay Thai? What's it called?
Muay Thai, yeah, Thai boxing.
Yes, like beyond. Now that is an internal, you're driven by something. And I wonder how much your accident impacts your drive, or maybe you're knowing that, like, none of this is guaranteed. I don't know. Tell me.
I think people are driven by two energies. One is towards something and one is away from something. And I think when we look at the most successful people in the world, that they're typically, the way I see it is the more successful you are, in a lot of cases, the bigger the space between what you're running away from and what you're running towards is, right? So if you look at the Zuckerbergs or whatever, there'll be something inside them that they really want to achieve. And that could be, they want to do something for someone else, or they want to do something for their family, or they want to experience something. But they'll also be running away from something in terms of what they don't want to have in their lives, what they want to avoid. That could be poverty. And so they're so scared of poverty that they try and make millions of dollars, right? And it's like, I need to run away from that. I was asked this the other day, what is it that I'm running towards, and what am I running away from? And it was interesting because what I enjoy most and what I'm excited about most is adventure. And I see life like this journey of just collecting stories. And so when I look through life, I just want to collect stories and collect experiences. And so that's what I'm running towards, but it's linked to what I'm running away from, which is a boring life. Someone asked me, what am I running away from? And I was like, a boring life. And so the conversation then was, well, why would your life be boring? And then you could say, as a psychologist, well, who's calling it boring, right? And so, and it's like, well, am I calling it boring? If I wasn't doing these things, would I be calling my life boring? Well, maybe. Or maybe there's some voice in my head that I heard many, many years ago that someone once called me boring, and therefore I went out of my way to spend the next 30 years trying not to be, right? But it's interesting because that energy has then put me in tricky situations in my life. I've gone and done things that are very extreme, extreme sports to a high level, and put myself in very dangerous positions in this thirst for adventure, but also this to escape a boring life, right?
Right. But I wonder, what I would ask you about that is, when you're in that quest, that feeling that you have where you're like, I want the adventure, really try to think back, like, where have I felt like this before? Right. What does this remind me of, this drive towards something? Because I look at it as, there's almost, potentially, could be wrong, but probably not, that there's an original something, like what did you see in childhood? Was there someone's life that you did not want to emulate? Or was there someone's life that you did want to emulate? Because we are so profoundly impacted by our early experiences of life. And like you, I think that my biggest fear was about mediocrity, where I felt like for my mother was like, you know what? Being average is good. Not you, Terry. You're extraordinary. But I was like, mediocrity, that's death. So what about you?
My dad encouraged adventure from a young age, very much so. So he was in the Marines, he was in the Paras. I used to watch him jump out of planes. He would go away for 6 months on exercise and tours, war, all this sort of stuff. When he was home, we used to do all sorts of adventures together. So for me, that adventurous spirit came from him, right?
Yep. And so it makes so much sense too, though, wanting to do it. And maybe, and I'm gonna venture to guess that you did it, and you did it even bigger than your father did.
From a civilian's point of view, yes.
Yeah.
I think the experiences he's had have been very different to me, but they were in a very military environment.
Yep. Got it. But it's so interesting because we can see how, we repeat a lot of things in life. It's just the way that we're, Freud would talk about it, and he calls it, repetition compulsion. And a lot of times this is reference to where we repeat things that are scary or stressful or traumatic, which kind of doesn't make sense. Like, it's counterintuitive, where you're like, why would I be repeating that? But this is part of the human condition. And I always feel like a lot of times, if we're repeating something that's traumatic, which is not what you're talking about, but I see this a lot in my therapy practice, we're unconsciously seeking like a do-over. Like, so why would I, when I was younger, be attracted to unavailable men, let's say? Yeah. And in my unconscious mind, I'm like, but this time it's going to be different. I'm going to win this one over. I'm going to make this unavailable person available, and that will mean I'm worthy. And until in therapy, I was able to go, okay, no, that's really not how it works. The original injury is an emotionally unavailable father. That is the thing that we must get to, process, integrate. And because I always say, like, we can only act it out or talk it out. That's it. So when you are not talking it out, whether that's journaling or talking to friends or talking to a therapist, I promise you, if there is something you need to deal with, you will be acting it out in your life.
Yeah. Just a quick shout out to the guys at Shield who manage this podcast, come up with the strategy behind the podcast, help me schedule interviews, as well as do all of the editing and the producing of the podcast. Without them, we wouldn't be able to produce this podcast. If you would like to create your own podcast, I can't recommend the Shield team enough. They have done well over 100 episodes for me over the last few years, and I've been so pleased with the results. So have a look in the description of this video or the podcast episode, and you'll see how to get in touch with them yourself. I think once you're aware of this sort of information as a parent, it makes your responsibility so much greater, doesn't it? I look at my kids and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to make sure I don't mess that up and do this right and do this wrong. With great power comes great responsibility, right? As soon as you realize this stuff, it's one of those things, parenting, I think. It's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And that's the same with most things in life, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think that's actually accurate. When we're super positive about something, we probably don't know what we're talking about. Yeah. And I think with parenting, the present, so much with parenting is not trying to micromanage kids' feelings, like allowing them to feel, acknowledging, wow, you're having big feelings right now. I see you're really mad. Let's talk about it. Like, I feel like when I grew up, there was a lot of what I would call forbidden emotions. Yeah. So, and I'm not talking about the, today we have different parenting styles. You have the child obsessed parenting style, which I feel like is not great for anybody. Yeah. And then in a healthy family system, it is child focused, meaning we don't just go on with our lives. Like, if a kid has a ballet thing, we take them to the thing. We prioritize what's happening in their smaller worlds without trying to control it all. And I see the difference between with the kids are so stressed out, right? Yeah. Even middle school kids and fifth graders, like, so stressed out because there's so much pressure. And I do think the social media stuff doesn't help either, because you can't just be a kid. Like, kids are getting phones so early, and all of this, like, what do people at school think? And what does this one think? And it's too much. Like there's no creativity. Also, kids have no ability to be bored. They're like this hyper engagement is so bad for your brain.
Mm.
Where do amazing ideas come from? Our parents, well, my parents were like, hi, go outside. Bye.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
bored. My mother'd be like, that's not my problem. Get it
I
together.
think
How could you be
boredom
bored? Go
is
build a
great
fort.
for kids, right? I mean, boredom is great. It's where most of your creativity comes from. I got to walk for about an hour and a half every morning, and
Mm,
it's when I'm outside and the sun's rising and I'm 60 minutes of the walk. That's when the ideas come off, right? It's like
yes.
not when I'm busy trying to sit down and think of ideas. It's when I'm out there doing nothing, just
It's
trying to
so
focus on
true.
something simple.
There's actually social science that proves what you're saying is true. There's a book
Right.
called The Net and the Butterfly, and
Okay.
it talks about breakthrough thinking and how we create breakthrough thinking. And one of the major ways is, plant seeds before you go to bed at night, being like, hey, I'm going to come up with a solution for this, whatever the thing
Okay.
is. Or before I was writing the book that I'm writing now, I would just plant the seed of like, what order should this stuff be in? Like, or don't, make sure, let me, get me a list of everything that should be in the book just to make sure I don't miss anything. And then as soon as I wake up in the morning, whatever would be on my mind, I would quick use Otter, like a
Yeah.
transcription service, and just say whatever it is that was on my mind. But
Yeah.
what the science says is that by walking, as you're allowing your brain, like we're giving our brain a break, it's like you are activating your genius lounge, they call it, where when you're not trying to get the answer and make the answer happen, there's a spontaneity. And I think that the statistic was something like you're 57% more creative when
Yeah.
you're trying to figure something out while you're walking, while you're just moving your body. So your instincts are
Amazing.
great.
I've heard something similar about being in the shower as well.
Yeah.
You get that eureka moment when you're when you're in the shower. I think as well the human brain is most creative between the hours of 3 and 5 a.m. or something like that.
Yeah.
And I often find myself waking up at 3 a.m. and before I'd be like, I'll just try and go back to sleep. Now I just get my phone and empty my mind and I'll write down the
Yeah.
ideas I've got, just kind of go with it rather than go against it and then go back to sleep, and I find that
Yes.
that's quite useful. Maybe it's alternative approach, but I think if you
No,
do,
I think, yeah, it's totally the way to
get
go.
it.
What they say in the book is that when you have an idea that comes, don't let it pass you. Don't
Mm,
assume it's coming back, because if you don't do it, someone else will. So it's like it's valuable to stop what you're
yeah.
doing and write it down or put it in your phone. I have a question for you though. So I want to I'm trying to figure out what type you are with boundaries. So
Okay.
there's a
Let's
way
do
that we
it.
can do this.
I'll be the
There's
guinea
like,
pig.
you're the guinea pig.
Yeah.
Well, you have to go to, and you guys listening, you can go here too. It's totally free. Go to boundaryquiz.com. There's 13 questions. It's super quick, but there's a difference. If we talk about types of boundaries, right? Styles of boundaries, you have either porous boundaries, which are too malleable, they're too loose. So that's more of like the peacekeeper or the pushover,
Mm,
or the chameleon, right? Where
right.
you're kind of like, oh, you like that? Me too. Um, and then you have rigid boundaries, which are more exactly what it sounds like my way or the highway.
Hmm.
You're more likely, if you have rigid boundaries, and this is where I feel like there's a lot of misunderstandings about boundaries. People
Yeah.
think if you have good boundaries that you're like, it's got to be my way. It's like we're, you know, verbally punching people in the face or saying no all the time, which is not true. So rigid boundaries means that you are my way or the highway, and that you're more likely to sort of cut someone off or ghost someone than you are to tell them that they hurt your feelings or what they did that bothered you. It's like people who are rigid in their emotions.
Mm.
So both of those are extremes, and the types there are more like
What did you call
there
the
could be
first one?
you could be more like, go ahead.
What was the first boundary type?
I think was talking about, oh, porous,
Porous.
right?
Yeah.
Which is malleable,
Yeah.
too loose, and then rigid, which is too tight, basically.
Okay.
And with the too tight, rigid boundaries, there's kind of it could be a loner personality where if something's getting too close, the person withdraws. They'd rather be alone. They can't deal with conflict. They don't know how to get off the phone when they're having a conversation where someone keeps talking and they can't just say, I'm exhausted, I really got to go. So they're more likely to isolate because they don't have the skills to do that. And then if we're looking at healthy boundaries, like what does it actually look like to have healthy boundaries? It really means that you know yourself, right? You know your preferences, you know your limits, you know your deal breakers, and you have the ability to communicate them. You know what you think, you know what your values are, you know you're not responsible for the way other people feel. You're responsible for your actions, sure. But like if somebody is trying to guilt you and you have really good emotional boundaries, you're less likely to acquiesce or to sort of fall under the control of someone trying to guilt you. If you really know yourself, you're like, you can have that experience. So even if it's with a parent, let's say, and the parent's trying to guilt, I would say to my mother, Mom, I see that you're upset that I'm not going to make the lunch on Sunday. And I still need to do this. I love you. I'm sorry you're upset. And yet I still need to do the thing that I'm doing, and I still need to not go. Like there's a way that we can manage it, but it's being able to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you. Because a lot of times, at least nowadays, and especially on social media, I find that people are misusing boundaries as like a lever of control. Like, this is my boundary. So when you're out with your friends, you need to call me every hour or text me every hour. That's my boundary. No, it's not. That's manipulation. That's control. It's the what was that guy's name? That the actor who had this whole thing. He was dating oh, what the hell is his name? Oh, forget it. I have no brain cells. Anyway, there was a whole thing that went public in the US, and it was a famous actor who was dating this woman that he met online, and she revealed their email exchange. And he was basically saying she was a professional surfer, and there was this email exchange where he was like, if you're a person who, basically giving a whole list of demands, even though they've been dating now for 6 months, and saying, these are my boundaries. And it's okay with me if that doesn't work for you. And he's basically saying, take down every picture on your Instagram that has you in a bathing suit. Do this, do that. You can't go out and hang out with other male surfers. You can't, which would be similar to her saying, oh, you're a totally famous actor. And we're together 6 months. But now my boundary is that you can no longer do any leading men stuff. You can't have any romantic storylines in your movies. That's my boundary, quote unquote, which again would not be a boundary.
That's really interesting, because it says to me that maybe there are hard boundaries and soft boundaries, right? Like sometimes you enter a relationship and there are certain hard boundaries you might have, right? That are more kind of linked to your moral compass and your values.
Yeah.
And then
we'll call them deal breakers.
Okay, so they're deal breakers, right? And then you've got soft boundaries, which would be sort of, I'm willing to change this because I want to be with you, sort of thing. Would that be
preferences? Accurate? Yes.
So you've got deal breakers and preferences.
Yep. And your desires are a little bit different. Your desires, according to me, are more like, they're sort of bigger things. Like you have a desire to live somewhere warm, or you have a desire to retire at this age, or you have a desire to travel around the world, right?
Right. Like a super soft long-term, not a boundary at all, but just like a desire.
But it's still important to know what they are. So in relationships, there's a difference between a preference is exactly that: coffee or tea, a shower or a tub, right? A preference. It doesn't mean anything is bad or wrong. It's still important to share your preference, though, in your relationship, because I feel like women in particular, like, I don't know, somehow we learned or got indoctrinated into this, like, try to be the cool chick. I'm easy breezy, no fuss, no muss, whatever works for you works for me. Which what you're really doing is you're denying the people in your life the opportunity to know you more intimately. It's not a demand. Sharing a preference. Hey, I really feel like having Chinese food tonight instead of pizza. Is that okay? Rather than just, so much of the time we're just trying to avoid conflict, like at all costs. Just right. Just don't want any conflict. Don't want to be rejected. Don't want anyone to be mad.
There's a balance, right? Like I can imagine some people just being over the top with this and just kind of this is my boundary for this and for this and for this, and
Yes.
suddenly it's impossible to navigate without trying to, and then ultimately you end up with a partner who the only partner you can get is someone who's a people pleaser, because
Yes.
they wouldn't want to, they're not really showing their own boundaries, right? And so
Yep. It's unhealthy, and it's not boundaries. So I just feel like boundaries get a bad rap when we're
yeah,
really talking about manipulation or coercive control or
yeah,
manipulation techniques. Like, I'm trying to get you to do what I want you to do. Because the difference, and how specifically how we can know the difference, is if what I'm talking about is my side of the street. So I say, I'd like to make a simple request that whatever the thing is, but it's about me. It's not me going after you and saying you always, or you did this, or you're wrong. It's saying, this is what I need. So an example, when I was younger, when I was dating in my 20s, and I stopped drinking when I was about 22. And so I was saying to my friends who were setting me up, don't set me up with anyone in recovery. And they're like, why? You're in recovery. You don't like people in recovery. Are you judging them? I'm like, dude, no. I'm not judging them since I'm in recovery. It's just that I know myself, and that's a deal breaker for me. It's enough to be one person with an addiction issue in a relationship. I can't imagine having two, even if we're both in recovery. I just
yeah.
don't want it. And your deal breakers are your own. You have a right. Like, I didn't need to explain that to my friend, but I did. But it wasn't wrong. I know myself. I ended up with someone without addiction issues because that's what I knew I needed in my life. So I think that knowing yourself is so important, and being able to say, I don't need your approval for my deal breaker, right? I need to know what it is for me. And you can try to understand it. And even with boundaries, sometimes I remember saying to my husband years ago, he would sometimes be like a few minutes late to pick me up from the train when we were living somewhere. And I would get off the train and I would look over it was like up top, it was like a railroad thing. I would look over, and if I saw the car, I'd be so happy. And I'd be like bouncing down the stairs, like, yay. But if I looked over and didn't see the car, I have no idea why, but I would be so sad, like stupid sad. Like, why am I
Yeah,
so sad? He's
yeah.
literally going to be here in 30 seconds.
He'd let
And
you
he was
down.
never more, what?
Yeah, you'd feel like he'd let you down.
Yes.
Yeah,
But I felt like I would be like mad. I'd be hurt. I'd be mad. And I remember saying to him finally, because like I'd be weird. I'd get in the car and he's like, how was your day? I was like, fine, I'm tired. Like you're just withdrawn in anger, acting like a
yeah.
sophomore in high school. And I remember finally being like, he's the nicest guy in the world, Tara. Why don't you just tell him that this is bothering you? So I said to him, babe, this is weird, but can you please, I'd like to make a simple request that you please try to be at the train station before my train pulls in, because for some reason, when you're not, I feel like bawling my eyes out. And I know that makes no sense. I
Yeah,
wasn't blaming him, right? I was letting him know me, even if I was confused about why I was feeling that way. And he
yeah,
was like, of course, no problem. And now this guy's never late, not even 30 seconds, and hasn't been in
really.
25 years.
I love that. That's just good communication, isn't it? It's just the foundation of a good relationship, right? Even if you can't really explain the why, here's the reality of the outcome of that, right? And so you kind of
Yeah.
just you listen and then change your behavior to suit it. It's really
Yeah. And
interesting.
you don't have to get it though. Sebastian, it's
Yeah,
like he didn't have to approve of
yeah,
that. He didn't have to go, oh, that makes sense to me,
yeah,
right? Because it doesn't have to make, what he has to care about is how I feel.
yeah,
What I care about is how he feels. Even if I don't understand it, I don't go, you shouldn't feel that way. That's ridiculous. Even if there's a little part of me that's like, I really don't get why he feels that way. But if he does, that's the important thing. So I think that that's another thing where we need emotional boundaries. If someone is saying, I don't know why you feel that way. Well,
yeah.
too late. I already do. And we should talk about that.
With that as an example, do you think that stems, like most things, back to your childhood and where you picked up late from school, or what I mean, this sort of stuff? Could it be linked to that?
I think I'm kind of very, in one respect, I'm super independent. And in
Mm,
another respect, I'm like crazy needy. So I think that there's a combination where what I want in a relationship and what I have in my marriage is to be securely tethered and completely free.
so you've got the protection and support there at all times, but you don't feel trapped, and you feel like you can
Ever.
experience as much as freedom as you want and explore life, basically.
Yes. And we're a great team, but it's like
Mm.
back in the day when I would say that's what I wanted, people would say, well, those are polar opposites. You can't have those things. And I was like,
Yeah,
no, I
yeah.
think I can. I
It's
think it's
interesting.
possible.
I think that's just a healthy balance, right? Rather than polar opposites in a lot of ways, you
Yes.
know.
And being super clear that you don't own your person, right?
Mm,
Like I don't own my person. My husband doesn't own me. We are
mm.
co-journeying, right? We're co-pilots on this life journey.
Yeah. I was thinking about any sort of boundaries I would have, and which I then linked to tolerances, right? What I've been calling tolerances, you know, it's basically similar. And one of the things that strikes me is I, I hate flakiness, right? Like if someone flakes on me or cancels on me last minute, I won't invite them back again, or I won't try and reschedule
Mhm.
or try and meet up with them again. In the same way that I never flake on people. So reliability to me is super important. So if I say I'm going to do something, I do it,
Yep.
even if it then becomes, you know, slightly awkward or difficult with the calendar situation, I'll make it work because I put my word to it, and that's really important to me. And I think that the reason behind that is when we promise something we don't fulfill it, then I think that it lowers our self-respect. And I think that it's really important to follow through the things that you promise yourself. And if you can't do that for other people or yourself, I think, you know, your own self-worth is kind of linked to that in a lot of ways. But I think a lot of people don't see that. But I certainly see it
Oh
as
no.
a human quality, right? A character trait,
With
if you like.
without a doubt, though, I totally agree with the whole keeping your word to
Mm,
yourself, right? This is internal boundaries, but keeping your word to other people. And what ends up happening with people pleasers, what we were talking about, having disordered boundaries, having too porous boundaries, right? We're trying to please everyone, is that you know the people pleasers in your life. You know the people who say yes when they really want to say no. And what they are is emotionally untrustworthy.
mm. Do you find that people pleasers who are kind of matching that description are very linked to sort of social chameleons as well? So they'll often change who they are around different people. So they might totally
Oh,
agree with you and say, yeah, that's how I feel. And then they'll go to someone else and you might have a complete opposite point of view and they'll agree with them. Depending
yep.
on who they with, they, you know, whatever situation they're in, they'll match the the kind of social dynamic.
Yes, that's one of the 7 archetypes. If you guys go to boundaryquiz.com,
Hmm.
take the quiz, see who you are. I'm curious. I think I'm not gonna tell you who I think you are, but I'm gonna
Okay.
write it and then I'm gonna email it and then you're gonna tell me
I'm I'm
if I
I'm
was
gonna I'm
right.
gonna try and do it during this call. How long does it take to do?
Not long, but it takes more of the mind than you're gonna have in this call.
Okay. I won't be able to have a conversation while I'm doing it. It'll
I
be a
don't think
bit
you can because it's scenarios. It's like you're out to dinner with your friends. You didn't drink. They all drank. The bill
right.
is $1 zillion. Do you know, like that?
Yeah. Okay, cool. Interesting. Yeah. It's amazing how these quizzes can give you little insights, right?
Yeah. Can I tell you how incredibly long it took to actually create a good quiz that
Really?
gives accurate results? It took 6 months of us
Wow.
doing it, testing it, testing it. It's
Sweet.
really
Yeah.
good. I'm really proud of it. It's very
Mm.
accurate,
So that is boundaryquiz.com.
easy breezy.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll definitely be doing that. And I'll you gotta beat me to it though with your assessment, yeah?
Mhm.
Don't
I'm
input it
sending it
yet
to
though.
you.
You can't tell me yet. Otherwise I'll just make up the answers to give you a different score.
That's the thing. I'm not telling you yet.
So can you give me some examples then of um what are your personal boundaries? I'd love to hear that. I mean, you've given me one which was, you know, the kind of being picked up on time or
Mhm.
early and the feeling that you had associated with that. What are your hard boundaries and your soft boundaries, if you're happy to share that?
I'm happy to. My deal breakers, I don't
Mm.
spend time with anyone who's actively addicted or doing drugs or drinking. Like I can't be around drunk people. It's just exhausting and stupid. Um, I also don't spend time with people who are not mentally pretty healthy. And that's the truth. Like I have low tolerance for couples who are like bickering, you're together, you're out to dinner, they're acting out their crap in front of you. No, thanks. I'm not
Yeah.
interested in that. Um, I it's really important to me that people keep their word. And I'm very much similar. I was very identified and resonated with what you said about that, that I will, and people being timely as well.
Why are we like that? Why do you resonate with that? And why are we both in that situation where where someone's word is very important?
Well, part of it is because we're straightforward people. Nobody's making you say you're going to do it. Just so if
Yeah.
you say you're going to do it, freaking do it. And if not,
Just
don't
don't
say it.
promise
It's
it,
how I
man.
felt.
Just don't
That
don't do it, right? But
right. That's it. Just do it. I also think that if you're a productive, you're ambitious. I'm the same. We've done a lot of things in our lives.
mm,
That's not based on me saying yes when I mean no. That's based
mm,
on me saying I will do it and then me moving heaven and earth to do it to the best of my
yeah,
ability. If I say I'll be there, no matter what, like you said, if I need to get in my car and drive 5, like I will do the thing. And if I can't, I also listen if it's impossible, but I will give plenty of time. I never just ghost someone. I never just don't show up. I
mm,
think that if I'm someone I'm an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person. And so I notice everything. I remember everything. It's like someone saying something to me in passing that doesn't work for me. Like I remember when I was a talent agent, I moved out to LA. They wanted me to run this agency in LA for a period of time. And I had a boyfriend out there, but whatever. So I said, I'll go out for X period of time. And I remember being out and socializing in LA and how I was such a New Yorker in like, you're just so like direct, just straightforward. Like you're just saying what you're saying, you're not. So people would be like looking over your shoulder to see if there's somebody more important. People I didn't like and didn't like me would be like, we should have lunch. I'm like,
mm,
why are you even saying that? We're not having lunch and we can still do a deal together. Like we don't have to be friends. I feel like in New York, there was something about if someone is saying F you, they say F you. Thank you.
yeah,
Right. Right. They don't
yeah.
say, let's have lunch. And so I couldn't stay in LA.
This is a very classic, from my perspective, a very classic like New York attitude, right? And I mean, I think you guys probably you call a spade, right? It's things are very direct
Yeah.
and obvious. Whereas I feel the British tend to be a little bit, we tend to tiptoe around and be quite polite and be the last to hang up and find it very, very difficult. We'll see after this call. I might find it very difficult to hang up. But it's one of those things, right, where it's a cultural thing.
Oh my God, it is so cultural. And it's also to a degree like the South in the US, where
Mm,
being direct is they've mastered the art of passive aggression, mastered
mm,
it. So if we're talking about someone and they really think this person is a hot mess, they say, oh, bless his heart.
mm.
You're like, you're not actually blessing anything. What you're really saying, it's code for. And I
Yeah.
don't like that. I don't like indirect communication. I really just like passive aggressive stuff. If someone has something to say, I'm always like, hey, we can talk about this, but you got to say it. Like I can't with the delayed texting back to show that you're like, if anyone says to me, like, I don't know, are you upset with me? I'm like, listen, you're never going to have to guess. If
Yeah.
I'm upset with you, I will have a conversation with you. I will let you know because I respect you rather than torturing you.
Do you think this is going back to the whole masculine feminine energy? Do you think that's more of a feminine energy to kind of be a bit more a bit less direct, a bit more indirect,
Yep.
and to kind of not necessarily give a direct answer, but beat around it a little bit and avoid that kind of being upfront, right?
I do. And what I hear from women in particular in my crew is they're like, I don't want to be a nag. I don't want to
Yeah.
be needy. I don't want to be seen as like hysterical. I don't want. So again, this is like the way that they will stop themselves from complaining about something at work. They're like, if I go to HR, then they're going to, say that
Yeah.
I'm like this, or I'm hysterical, or I'm a drama queen, or I must have my period. Right. Like
Yeah.
these are the stereotypes that we're up against where I'm like, listen, the bottom line is silently suffering, becoming resentful. Because what happens if we go this long path of not really saying what we think, of pleasing other people? It's like a one-way ticket to bitter land. That's it.
Mm.
There's no other stops on that train. You end up a martyr. You end up bitter. That's no way to live your life.
No.
It's better to have the conflict in the moment
Yeah.
and be who you are, you know? Like,
It's interesting though, because in a lot of relationships, this is one of the biggest struggles guys have, right? It's like, why didn't you just tell me? Or, guys communicate so directly. Typical guys in their high masculine guys communicate so directly. But I find a lot of guys that I know who are kind of embody more of a feminine energy. They don't. They're far more indirect. There's more gossiping. It's a little bit hard to understand what they're trying to say, or they won't give you a direct answer. If they're upset, they won't necessarily tell you, right? And so, and I guess this is the kind of typical challenge in relationships between men and women. You know, the way in which we communicate with each other is very different, isn't it?
It is. And I have a bunch of different courses on actually communication for this exact reason, because I take the things that people email me all the time or on social media all the time, being like, I want to be a better communicator. I do not know how. I'm like, okay, I'm creating a workshop for you, or I have a course for you, or the books as well, right? I've got this, the Boundary Boss workbook. I have the book itself. It's like all of these things come out of what people are the biggest pain points. Because when I really think about what is my dharma, like what is my purpose, what do I want to do, it's really to help as many people as possible learn the skills to lessen their own suffering and elevate their own joy in this life, you know?
That's fascinating. And it's amazing to me how much all of that is driven by our boundaries.
It so is. And our ability to communicate our boundaries. You got to know them, but you also got to be able to say them. And in the books and in the courses I teach, one whole chapter in Boundary Boss is just scripts. Right. 1/3 of this book, 1/3 of the workbook itself is just ways for you to customize scripts for what it is that you want to say. So it's something you could actually say. Because what I would say is different. You don't have to be that direct. You can always be kind. You can always be loving if it's appropriate. There's ways to do it. And I think that people get worried that they have to suddenly be harsh, and it's not true at all. There's ways that you'll come up with the right words for you, because we're all different. But it's so important, if you're going to live your real life, that people know you. And when you don't share your preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers with folks, they literally do not know who you are. It is so painful.
Do you know what's interesting to me is the fact that a lot of people wouldn't want to share their boundaries or their tolerances with something because they'd be worried they would upset someone, right? Well, I think my point of view on this is when you share your boundary with someone, they're more likely to respect you. And that might seem or come across as disruptive or conflict or whatever. But I feel like respect is very much linked to discipline. And when you say this is my boundary, you're basically saying like this is an element of my self-discipline, what I'm willing to have in my life and take in and whatever. And when people see that, they're more likely to see you, or you will appear as you have higher value and they should respect you, right?
Yep, without a doubt. Not to mention, you're trustworthy. So think about the people in your life who are direct about what they need and what they want. And I don't mean bullies. I mean just people who are honest.
This is one of the biggest challenges I've got with people who are, chameleons, social chameleons or people pleasers. I find them very hard to trust because of that, right? What they say something to you and then they'll go to someone else and it will be a different conversation. And then who are they? Do they know themselves? Because they're so in tune with pleasing other people. Who actually are they?
I mean, you got to do the work to find out. People are like, your authentic self. I'm all like, listen, your authentic self isn't like some core that you're just going to pop open and find. This is self-development, right? We build. You have a core of who you are and what you like and what you want and don't want. But then we make choices as to who will we become in this world? Who do I want to be? Am I willing to do what is required to become that person, to become trustworthy, to tell the truth, to be someone that people can count on? And that takes work.
Yeah, it's work worth doing. It is work worth investigating now rather than later, because so much of this dictates so many decisions you make in your life. You know?
So true. And how successful you become. I feel like if you never master boundaries, that is its own glass ceiling.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because there's going to be a tipping point where you can't be prioritizing other people's feelings and your brilliant thought at the same time. It has to just be you being able to assert how you feel. And that doesn't mean you have to trample on others to do it, but you can't do both forever. You can get only so far success-wise if you have not mastered this skill.
Brilliant. Terry, really, really insightful, fascinating conversation. I can understand why you would spend so much time and energy and your life into studying this topic and sharing it with people, because it's a Pandora's box of information and insights, isn't it, really? And yeah, I'm excited to get this out to our followers and listeners. Best way for anyone to continue learning from you, what would you say? The first place to go is the boundaryquiz.com?
I say boundaryquiz.com because that also will give you something. It'll give you a place to start. It's almost like a baseline of like where you are right now with your boundaries. I also have on my website, terrycole.com, I have courses coming up. I've got a Real Love Revolution course coming up at the end of January. I've got a bunch of stuff happening. So, and you can also always see what I'm doing on Instagram. So it's just at Terry Cole.
Amazing. Fantastic. Terry, thank you so much for being on.
Also,
go on.
You have to come on my podcast, which is just the Terry Cole Show. So to be continued. You will see us again, people.
To be continued, part 2, and we'll go into some interesting stories for sure. I think we've actually got a friend in common as well, Samira Alexandra.
Oh,
she is a hypnotherapist based in Dubai.
Yeah.
Do you know Samira?
I know of her. I actually don't know her.
I've had a couple of chats with her about your work. She's pointed me towards your work a few times, and yeah, it's all been very, very positive. So but yeah,
yes,
and also we can talk about my work with her if you like in the next podcast we do.
Yes, please. Also, do you know Erica, she lives in Dubai, Erica with a K, and it's like Erica Taught Me is her brand.
Taught me. Let me have a quick check. 1 sec.
She's a lawyer. She's so cute. She comes to the US 4 times a year and records her pods like in the West Village or whatever. So she had me on, and I think you would love her, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's just great. She's just very smart.
I can see her here.
Can you see her? And she lives in Dubai.
Is it Erica Kuhlberg?
Yes, it is.
Erica Kuhlberg.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ah, cool. I'll follow her now. If you'd like to introduce me to her, that'd be fantastic. And I'll maybe I can get her onto the podcast.
I definitely will. And I said to her when you guys first inquired and thinking like, maybe could I get myself to where you are? And I was like, Erica, give me a fucking reason. Like, let's do something. Let's do an event. Let's, and then of course I'm writing a book.
Have you been to Dubai before?
No, but please give me a reason to come. Like, let's do something.
Let me know when. Well, I mean, if I'll speak to Erica as well, and that'd be great. Maybe a little event or something could be quite good fun. Yeah, we can do it after my next book comes out, which is a year from now. I know it seems like a long time away, but you know what I mean? But that's the end of 24 could be great, or the beginning of 25. Yeah. Well, you've got me as a contact now, so you've got someone in Dubai who knows you and would love to have you here. So
Well, thanks. Okay, so and I'll get in touch with your team about scheduling you on my pod.
Yeah, speak to Sarah, and I'm
great.
I am here until the 8th of December. Then I'm taking a month off, so anytime before that would be great. Okay, great. Cool.
To be continued, but thank you so much. It was really a pleasure, Sebastian.
Thank you for all the insights and lessons.
Sure. To be continued. See ya. Bye.
See you soon. I really hope you enjoyed today's Warrior Academy podcast episode. We're going to keep creating these episodes because I know that so many parents find them useful or get insights or get ideas about how to develop their child's character. But it all comes down to the 3 C's: confidence, conduct, and concentration. So if you want to get a deep insight into the levels of confidence your child has, the level of concentration they have, or the level of conduct they have, so that you can actually put a score next to it and then work towards increasing those scores like we do in the Warrior Academy, then I'd love to invite you to fill in the Breakthrough Area Assessment. It takes about 5 minutes of your time, and you will get a personalized PDF report on your child's 3 C's. To access the Breakthrough Area Assessment and find out your child's 3 C's score, all you need to do is go to www.breakthrougharea.com.